Welcome back to the Dukascopy TV studio. Well, it's Hollenbeck against Hancock as we have another very special debate talking about Europe. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for coming into the studio once again. The topic on the agenda is Europe. Cyprus banks have opened. We're watching people taking out their limit of €300 a day. What are we thinking? What are we looking for? What's going to happen here? Good, positive vibes? Are we happy there's been a deal struck, or are we a little bit more concerned?
So what has happened in the case of Cyprus is that we basically set a precedent to almost guarantee that we're going to have a bank run when either Spain or Italy get into trouble. Okay, and also the fact that we are taxing, or we're basically stealing money of deposits over 100,000. I think starting today we're going to see a slow motion bank run in countries such as Spain and Italy as businesses who basically have money coming in from the sale of products and money going out to pay their suppliers, and they're likely to have well over 100,000. They're going to really question whether they want to do their working capital management through either an Italian or Spanish bank. So I think we're likely to see a slow motion bank run starting immediately based on what's come out of Cyprus.
I mean, the European response to this crisis has been a bit like Winston Churchill's observation about the United States. They always do the right thing once they've exhausted the alternatives. And this is just another case of Europe dragging its heels, dithering, going through a series of relatively failed or subprime solutions until they finally arrive at one that seems to stick. And beyond the immediate problem with Cyprus and the pain that Cyprus is going through, Frank's got a good point. I mean, what it does is create, from a wider European perspective, this atmosphere of fear and the domino effect that it should have been contained as, well, let's go back. Cyprus is a knock-on effect from Greece. What they should have contained Greece years ago. That's now had a knock-on effect through the whole system. Cyprus was the next block to fall, and people have to be frightened about what happens in Italy and other vulnerable countries. I mean, in reality, the banks in Europe look exposed, dangerously exposed. Does this solution make that better or worse? I think it's the delays, not so much the final solution they came up with, the endless dithering and delays.
Okay, so what happens next then? What are we waiting for?
Well, I guess we're going to wait for today and see what happens immediately in Cyprus. But what happens down the road is what's the bigger question, or what happens in the wider EU. I mean, the Commission and the European Central Bank and the heads of state continually promise community-wide reform of the banking system. So more common rules, more transparency, a greater role for the market in deciding the solvency of banks before a crisis hits. So far, the rhetoric has definitely outpaced the reality. So I think the ball now shifts back to the political masters. Again, Europe's track record is not great up till now.
Well, I think we're missing the elephant in the room, in the sense that the banking sector crashed the U.S. economy. The banking sector, because it played on derivatives, crashed the Iceland economy. The banking sector in Spain and Ireland crashed the economies because of their bets on housing. And we now have Cyprus also crashing the economy because of its bet on Greek sovereign debt. And we're likely to have the same thing in Estonia recently. And we basically do not realize that we need to change the way we do banking. Okay, with deposit insurance, with this push for a European banking union, with this push for a unique supervisor, we're basically trying to put a Band-Aid on a fraudulent banking system. And what we need to do is, what I've suggested before, is separate deposit banking from loan banking, implement the Chicago plan, and basically restructure our banking sectors worldwide so that we no longer have the banking sector sink economies. Okay, we cannot continue to have one sector in the economy destroy all other sectors. We need to have a serious look at the banking sectors and how to restructure it instead of putting constantly putting band-aids on it, on which something which everybody knows is fraudulent banking, which is the fractional reserve banking system, and that's really what we need to do.
There's a deeper problem, though. I mean, the other common denominator in all this is just slow to sluggish to negative growth. Europe's got a competitiveness problem, and as long as it's struggling along with large, sections of the European economy barely making, barely staying even, and in some countries, quite clearly the outlook for 2013 is contraction. Bank crises emerge. So. Is this traceable to the banks? Absolutely. Behind the banks, there's a competitiveness and growth problem, and Europe's got to sort that out. You find, if you look at it, Italy, Spain, Greece, obviously. It's not just a competitiveness problem in Europe, it's a global competitiveness problem. I mean, Italy's producing the very goods and services, the shoes, the clothing, the textile, the apparel, that is coming on stream in a massive way from the developing world, and they're just not competitive. And until they unravel or untangle that Gordian knot, there's going to be no solution to the indebtedness problem, the leveraging problem, and also the imbalances in Europe itself.
So why this laissez-faire approach? Where is this laziness or this sort of lack of crisis until it's really on the forefront? Where has this came from, and what can we do against it?
Well, let's see. As he indicated, is the way they've handled the Cyprus problem is catastrophic. And what are we trying to do in Europe? We're trying to solve a debt problem with more debt, and we're not really looking at some of the structural problems that we have in the system. And for me, this is, communism took 70 years to finally decide that things couldn't work out, and I think you're seeing a lot of that in Europe with socialism. So there's a lot of bad moments in the future. It's just a shame that we don't have visionaries in Europe that can actually say, okay, if we keep going, we're going to go over the cliff. So let's really think about something radically different, okay? And let's avoid the cliff and try to go in a direction that will lead to growth. And the current solutions we're providing are just not going to lead us there. So for me, that's a big problem.
Yeah, and Frank's, this structural problem, in a sense, I don't think it's just an ideological problem. I think it's a cultural problem. I mean, to quote dear old Margaret Thatcher, she had this famous saying, can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs. Europe wants the omelet, and it doesn't want to break the eggs. Or put it in Joseph Schumpeter's terms, they want the creation, but they don't want the destruction. They don't want anything to change. We keep things the way they are. And it's a lovely society to live in. I mean, we all live here. It's a very stable, long lunches, 6-week vacations, job for life. But it's a model that allowed Europe to recover from the Second World War, from the 1950s to the 70s, late 70s. Europe was going gangbusters. I mean, we forget it had a lower unemployment rate than the United States. It had growth rates above the United States. But the model's reached its end, and no one has the guts to quote Thatcher, to break the eggs.
So things have to get ugly before they get better. Well, gentlemen, thank you very much for your insights there. We have reached a bit of a consensus, but nevertheless, always an interesting subject to discuss. Thank you. Okay, well, that's the end of today's debate. Thank you very much for watching, and please do click back to Dukascopy for many more exclusive interviews. Bye for now.